Welcome to Supernatural Circumstances, the podcast where we take you down the rabbit hole into the fantastic world of the strange, the paranormal, and the unknown. I'm Morgan Knudsen.
And I'm Mike Browne. It's time to dim the lights and settle in. Come along with us on this week's adventure. And we like shapes, apparently, on this podcast because we're talking with, this time, Mike Ricksecker about another triangle.
Yes, we are. Alaska's mysterious triangle, in fact. And a nice kickoff to our winter Christmas season.
Right.
To delve into sort of a chilly place when we think about this time of year. And also the mysteries that come with it. And his book, Alaska's Mysterious Triangle, is absolutely fascinating. Very similar to the Kentucky Triangle, which we talked about with Brandon Elvis.
Yeah, I was really surprised in looking into the Alaska Triangle, the similarities. So we will get into that with Mike forthwith.
Yes, absolutely. I can't wait to have this conversation because I've got so many questions. Let's do this.
Okay.
Oh, there we go. Welcome to Supernatural Circumstances. It's great to have everybody here. This is, of course, the paranormal podcast without the bullshit. And we are so excited to have Mike Ricksecker back with us today about his incredible book, Alaska's Mysterious Triangle. And it is so interesting. So, Mike, thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you both for having me back, Morgan and Mike. Really appreciate it. We had a wonderful conversation last time, so definitely looking forward to this one.
Oh, we are too. And this is one of those subjects that I know has intrigued both Mike and I for a really long time. It's so bizarre because it broadens the horizons of what people think about our world, not just the paranormal. This is something that is beyond just Alaska. I mean, we're seeing this in various areas. We had Brandon Elvis here not that long ago talking about the Kentucky Triangle, but maybe you can give everybody a bit of a rundown on what the Alaska Triangle actually is.
Yeah, absolutely. So a lot of people ask me, so when you say Alaska Triangle, do you mean like the Bermuda Triangle? And yeah, there are a lot of these types of areas around the world. So yeah, there's Bermuda. There's one in Alaska. Brandon, is talking about the one in Kentucky, just around the corner here from where I'm at, Lake Michigan. There's the Dragon Triangle out there by Japan. When I was out in Ireland, I discovered there was one out there. So yeah, these are all over the world, and really what they are, and they're not necessarily in a triangular shape. It's just we find 3 points that are kind of there. It's really because of the vernacular of the Bermuda Triangle, where they did kind of notice it was somewhat triangular in nature between those 3 spots. So not every type of location that has this type of activity. They just, choose 3 general, maybe cities or points on the map and say, oh, there's our triangle area. But really what it is, it all starts at the core of the Earth. And at the Earth's core, you have a spinning ball of molten iron that's emitting a very strong magnetic field, which is good news for us because that protects us from the solar wind. If we didn't have that protection, we would have been fried long time ago. So this is a good thing for us. But as that magnetism passes through the Earth's mantle and crust, it interacts with different metals and minerals, and depending on what metal or mineral it interacts with and how large that deposit is, it will create some other localized magnetic fields that can cause some of this strange activity to happen. And specifically there in Alaska, they did a magnetic survey back in the 1960s of about 100,000 square miles, and within that they've determined that there were 5 distinct magnetic characters, and within those magnetic characters, they determined that there were what they called negative anomalies. So they're quite aware that there is this unusual magnetic energy there in Alaska.
It's so interesting because this also comes with some really strange activity. And I mean, Alaska's got quite the history in general in terms of missing people. Something like 20,000 people missing since the 1970s. Like it's really, really crazy. So what are some of the things that have actually been going on within the triangle that's made people go, okay, well, wait a minute, what's happening?
Yeah. Like you said, you have the missing people there. That's really, it's a large number. Since 1988, that's really when they started keeping track of missing people up there. I've heard some other estimates from before that, but those are really just estimates. 88 is when they started keeping the official number. So when we did the Alaska Triangle television show, was it 5 years ago now? The number we were using 18,000 since, or was it 16, 18,000, whatever, since 1988. But there's another database that they've released here recently that's specifically for indigenous people that have gone missing. And so there's several hundred more that are within that, which is kind of interesting. But yeah, so you have the missing people, you have missing airplanes where you've had, since they started keeping track of those in the 60s, we have over 40 that are still missing, and then we know of other missing airplanes from before that as well. So you have sightings of like ghost ships. You've had some really strange like ships that have sunk, and those stories that surround those are really, really bizarre. You have, of course, paranormal activity that occurs up there. A lot of different cryptid sightings like Sasquatch, Hairy Man, the Kushtaka, and some of these other different things. So there's really just a bevy of different activity going on up there.
Mike and I have talked about this on the show before, where there's anomalies and things like that, even just here in Alberta, that are so parallel to some of what we see and hear about in Alaska, which is really interesting to me. And the more people I talk to, the more people are having these geological anomalies just come forward. And what I found really interesting, Mike, when we talked to Brandon Elvis, they began doing a geological dig on the part of this Kentucky Triangle. And what they found was really interesting was that the more they dug down, the weaker the electromagnetic field seemed to get. And they weren't sure exactly where it was coming from. So it's really fascinating. So it's interesting that this dig had been done in Alaska, because that was one of my questions for you. It's like, where is this coming from? What is this?
Yeah, that's a little bizarre if it's getting weaker as you go further into the ground. It should be getting stronger. With Alaska specifically, I call it like a fantastic cocktail of different energies. We talked the magnetism of the Earth, but you have a lot of seismic energy up there. There's a lot of earthquakes. I was up there for like a 6.7 earthquake in 1993. You have volcanic activity that occurs up there. So the Aleutian Islands are some of the most active volcanoes on our continent that occur there in the Aleutians. In fact, in 2020 or 2021 thereabouts, scientists had discovered an ancient caldera underneath there that's basically fueling these volcanoes there. Then you have the solar wind. We were talking about, okay, the magnetism's protecting our planet from it, but around the poles that protection is a little bit thinner. And when you get those, like we've had a lot of solar flares and things like this recently, that people a little bit further down here are like, oh, look at the sky, we finally get to see the northern lights. Well, when I was stationed in Alaska during the 90s, it was beautiful to see that. But that's really that interaction there in the ionosphere from the solar wind smacking into the Earth's magnetic shield. And with it being a little thinner up there, you get that energy that will just, again, mix with everything else that's going on up there in Alaska.
There seems to be so much. And like when you say all that's going on up there, it's a lot. There's even been, just from what I was reading, just the even a few famous disappearances that have been looked into over the years, like Hale Boggs was a famous politician, and people that they've gone to search for these people, and they just seem to be plucked out of nowhere. Like and I'm sure the the vastness of the Alaskan wilderness is definitely playing a role here, because I mean, here you've got so much, but
Yeah, I mean, people do go wandering out in the wilderness and get eaten by a bear. That does happen.
Yeah.
yeah, but this is like leaning towards like something else that's going on here.
Yeah, it's so far above the national average that yeah, you are going to have those people that just naturally go missing. You have people that go up there that purposely get lost in the woods and don't want to be found. I remember there was one such gentleman. Can't remember his name offhand, but several years he'd been missing for a long time, and several years ago they found him in like some old bus that he was kind of camping in. But he had wanted to just go out there and be alone and just unplugged from everything, and unfortunately he perished out there. So yeah, you do have those type of cases, but those are the exceptions. You have like Michael LeMaitre, the 2011 Mount Marathon race, a very public race, and he reached the checkpoint halfway through the race and never seen again. Just completely disappears in the middle of this race. And they had the Alaska State Troopers involved. They're sending out the dogs, all of this stuff to try to find him. Nothing was ever found. Where did this guy go?
That to me is where some of these cases really get interesting, and where I found the interesting intersections was within not only the UFO sightings up in Alaska, because there seems to be a massive influx of those, as well as some of the indigenous folklore that has been talked about. And I mean, there's been so many sightings over the years of things like Sasquatch, and of course they've got the stories of this sort of supernatural Sasquatch called Nantinak, which is was the Sasquatch that apparently raided Portlock, Alaska, and all these people disappeared in the 1950s and were murdered and whatnot. So what's the relationship there? What are the locals saying about what's going on?
Yeah, the local indigenous tribes have a lot of different legends, like you're discussing. And yeah, that that was you think is a perfect setup. It was a canning village really for the salmon and fish and all that they were harvesting. And yeah, you had these people were finding body parts washing up on shore. What happened to these people? And so they talked about the kind of common vernacular is Harryman, but Nantinak is the indigenous term. So you have stories like that. You have stories like the Kushtaka, which is really the quote unquote otter man, and that's half human, half otter, and it's very, very similar to Wendigo legends, where you have this creature that lures people out into the woods and will either eat them, or will turn them into another Kushtaka. So it's very similar to Wendigo, but has a different kind of body shape and form. And so, yeah, those legends really kind of permeate throughout the land as to what's going on up there. They do talk about things like, there are portals up there. There are very, very energetic hot spots. And so when these people go missing, our modern context is more like UFO abductions and things like this, but we have found throughout history that a lot of times it's these other beings that were attributed to it, whether it's something like the Kushtaka there in Alaska, or you look into other cultures where it was, the fairy realm and people were getting taken away into the fairy realm and things like this. But it's very, very reminiscent of our modern day UFO abductions.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, what's always interesting to me about the local stories, and especially in the case of Alaska, was that so many of these cases are highly documented. This isn't just these stories that are just drifting around that people are, you know what I mean, Mike? Like they're not just this person went missing and then a legend got built around it. There's something that's really, really tangible going on here. Like there's something that initially the reports go out that somebody's gone missing, and that person is just gone. Like they are just completely gone. And I thought it was really interesting in the book when you got into the idea of these vortexes and portals, which is also again tied to that in what the indigenous also talk about in regards to things like like Sasquatch disappearing through portals, and of course we talk about with UFOs and things like that. So what's your take on these portals, and why might this be a reason why these people are disappearing?
Yeah, portals are naturally occurring in nature. Naturally occurring in nature. Great use of words, Mike. And that's what my latest book, Portals to the Stars, is about. It's a deeper dive into all of this phenomenon, what portals, stargates, and these things really are, and how ancient cultures had used that type of technology. And so, even our modern science, NASA, has recognized that, yes, we have naturally occurring portals in space where the Earth's magnetic sphere interacts with the solar wind. And they've had satellites up there for over 9 years now trying to study all of this. And they have, to this day, they still have no predictive model over it. These portals are opening and closing randomly. They will open at different sizes. They will just suddenly close. There's no predictive model for it whatsoever, but they know that they are occurring, and they've been studying them. Now, even though when they initially published their findings, they said, yeah, these are portals, but we're going to call them X points. They kind of wanted to get away from the whole kind of metaphysical connotation of what a portal is. And now they have some other crazy term for them that they've kind of even gone away from X points now. But yeah, we have naturally occurring portals. Now, it makes a lot of sense to me that, given that it's going to be the magnetism that's really going to be opening and closing these things. Well, the magnetism, the source is here on Earth. So we should have more of this, or more powerful ones here on Earth rather than out in space. And so, when these people go missing, whether it's out in the woods, missing airplanes, these sorts of things, is that are they passing through these? Fantastic story that I included in the book, which actually doesn't take place in the Alaska Triangle. It's Bruce Gernon down in the Bermuda Triangle, where he flew through what he called an electronic fog, and really it just zipped him ahead in time, like over a half an hour, which is really, really fascinating. And so and that's kind of the big question. Okay, if somebody passes through a portal, where they step into it, fly into it, whatever, drive into it, where does it take them? Does it take them to another place in the universe? Does it take them to another place on Earth, another dimension, another point in time? And so I always have fun with this one, talking about it, like with the missing airplanes. If they pass through a portal to another point in time, and we'll just use an arbitrary number like 500 years into the past, what would an airplane look like to the indigenous peoples of the area, who have no context of an airplane, right? So they would see it as some huge giant bird. Of course, it's going to be very loud to them. So exactly, is this where some of the Thunderbird legends come from?
The last time we had you on the show, we talked about this idea of this stacked time theory, and
yeah,
I thought that is in such great relation to this subject matter, is that maybe that there's something like that's going on here, is that we're just seeing one photograph, and there's other photographs that are still in play here. That there's this stuff is just, as we know, time is just all in the now, and so there's got to be these separate realities, I guess, that are happening regardless. And Alaska has always been one of those places, and you talk about this in the book as well, about just UFO sightings and Alaska's UFO activity. And we've touched a little bit on the idea of this being abduction. Many people remember the movie Fourth Kind, focused on Alaska's abductions and things like that. Is this something that people are still actively reporting? Like this, could this be something that, I mean, it should be, right? Like this has got to be in the list of considerations.
Yeah, there are still a lot of UFO sightings that occur in Alaska. And I think because people are more aware of it now, and also there's not as much of that stigma anymore. Now that I don't call it disclosure, because really what's going on with the hearings is they're just talking about things that we've been talking about for decades, right?
Right.
It's in a more formal setting. Congress is listening to us, being written into the official record. So it's a conversation that's happening now, which is great. So it's allowing people to come forth with their own stories without that stigma of being like a crackpot or a nut job or this sort of thing. So now there are more people all over the place coming forth with their stories. So Alaska is definitely one of them. But we have some really classic cases from up there. One of the most significant UFO cases in our country's history happened in 1986, a Japanese Airlines flight where Captain Teriyuchi had that significant encounter, and he was interacting with over his radio with the U.S. Air Force, with the Alaska Air Traffic Control, and even a United Airlines flight got involved in the whole thing. It was really, really a significant experience that happened there. So, yeah, Alaska is really a prime location, and it makes sense because it's so vast, it's so large. If you happen to be an extraterrestrial, you want to find a location to kind of hide away at, it's so remote and so sparsely populated that, yeah, you could choose any old mountain or lake. There's over 3 million lakes up there. People talk about Minnesota here being like the land of 10,000 lakes, and no, go to Alaska, 3 million.
Yeah, we got nothing. We got nothing compared. Well, maybe Canada might come a little closer, but I don't know.
Yeah.
Maybe a little bit. But yeah, I have a friend of mine he works as a bear guard up in Alaska, and he works typically in Seward, but he goes all over Alaska. And one of the places that he ended up visiting for about 30 days or so was Port Luck, Alaska, or Port Chatham, and it was so interesting to him when we were chatting, and he said the number one thing that he felt throughout the entire trip was this feeling of not being alone, like despite the vastness. He said, and I mean, this could have been because they were having electromagnetic issues as well, like with equipment and things like that were just exactly like what we've talked about today. But he was absolutely convinced that there was something there with him, and they were seeing very strange lights that were showing up at nighttime, like hearing footsteps, having rocks thrown at them constantly, lots of interactions, lots of yelling and screaming from Sasquatch, probably, and whatnot. And we ended up having Ron Moorhead on the show, who ended up joining him up there, and he was absolutely 100% convinced that this was the killings and the missing people and stuff like that was a result of the Sasquatch there, which was really, really interesting and a little terrifying to think that
Sure.
Maybe they're a little grumpier up there.
Yeah, you're there on the island, and they're going to be there with you. So yeah.
Yeah, no, it's really wild. So when it comes to this subject matter, when like the book came out, I just went and bought. I know you sent it to us, but I ended up just going and buying it, and it's so good. And I think it's so detailed, and I think with anybody who wants to understand a bit of the scientific investigation behind it, this really, really is the book. But what kind of skepticism did you meet, if any, when the book came out?
I mean, there's always, whenever we're talking about these subjects, there's always skepticism because, yeah, we're talking, I talk about paranormal activity in there. I talk about, of course, the Bigfoot, Sasquatch, those sorts of things. And, anytime that you're talking about legends and myth from the natives, it's always met with skepticism. It's just stories that are handed down. But, I posted an article today. It was out of Norway. And it was a legend about, some battles that had happened up there back in like the 11 or 1200s. And one of the ways that they were able to defeat their opponents is they threw this diseased body down a well and basically poisoned the water for these people. And so this was like a legend forever. And, of course, our, modern scientists and academics and all that were like, no, it's just myth. It's just legend, et cetera, et cetera. They found the body.
Wow.
They just found the body to confirm the legend. So I kind of laugh at the skeptics. It's like, if these are stories that indigenous people have handed down for hundreds, if not thousands of years. And it's like they take it out of or try to put it into the context of our modern people. They always use the idea of like the telephone game in school, and you start in, we did this in first grade, start on here with one person, and you give them a little saying, you see where it ends up around on the other side, and it always gets changed. It's always something weird and goofy. It's like, yeah, but we were 6, we're going to be goofy and change it and all that. That's our nature as children to do that. But the indigenous tribes, because most of them did not have a written history. It was all stories that were handed down orally. And it was important to keep those stories intact because there was information within those stories for their survival. So they couldn't change up the information, because if they passed down something that was incorrect, that might mean the death of the tribe the following winter or whatever. So yeah, it's really like a disservice that modern academia gives the native tribes and the indigenous people when this was extremely, extremely important to them. And then we find evidence that, yeah, it was true.
Yeah, well, I know, like, even here in Alberta, because, I mean, we're semi-close to Alaska and whatnot. We've got a large indigenous population here, and we've got tales that have survived right into Alberta's legal history. Like the first legal hanging here in Alberta was a Wendigo case, and so it's just it's on the books, and it's one of those things that I think even myself when I first started years ago, it was okay, that's interesting, but I wasn't sure how much weight to assign it in terms of whether or not it was real. And the more I started to delve into this stuff, and I think, Mike, you can probably say the same thing, because I think Mike's been out here a couple of times, and
yes.
yeah, and we've been down that road together, and the more you go down it, the more you realize that all of this stuff has a root of truth in it. There's something that's happened that you have to pay attention to. And that's the one thing, especially living in Alberta, my eyes have been broadly opened by not only these stories, but then researching and experiencing some of this stuff that you just can't look away from. And you're totally right that there's a disservice that academia is doing to these stories, pretending that they're just old wives' tales, basically.
Yeah, absolutely. 100% on board with you. There's always some at least a grain of truth within there, something that the story's been built upon. And I've been covering a lot with the new book, Portals to the Stars, the spiral symbol, which we find all over the world, and the indigenous tribes are saying this means a portal. In modern academia, it's like, no, that can't mean a portal. It's too metaphysical. It can't mean a portal. So what do we think it is? So the modern academics look at it and say, well, could be a migration pattern, which makes zero sense, because why would you migrate in a spiral like that? If we need to migrate over there for the winter, you go in a straight line, right?
Yeah.
I mean, a spiral works great for crime scene investigation. It's very thorough, but not for migration. Or they might say it signifies like water, thinking like a whirlpool or something like that. And not a whirlpool in that sense. So the ancient symbol for water was the wavy, jagged line. The idea of, okay, maybe a whirlpool, yes, but the energy that is rising out of the ground, it's a vortex. It is a whirlpool of energy that is rising up out of the ground. And so it's this spiraling energy like that. It's more of like a swirl as it comes up. But if and that's the kind of like 3-dimensional aspect of it. But when you go 2-dimensional, just take a slice out of it. Well, that's your spiral. And you have locations all over the world where you have scientific people that have gone to sites like Rollright stones and other locations where within that stone circle, they have found that, yes, the energy is spiraling within it. So, it just blows my mind when modern academia just doesn't want to accept the traditions that have been handed down, and it takes so much to try to prove their ideas wrong when it's like, Why? These are the ideas that have been around for thousands of years. Why do we have to reprove it again and again? Like the finding of Troy, story that was passed down, the Battle of Troy, that story was passed down for millennia. And, the academics at the time were like, Troy never really existed. It's just a fanciful story. Until in the late 1800s, they actually found the city of Troy. It's bizarre.
Yeah, it is. It's really weird. And I noticed this, the more, I guess the closer parapsychology is getting to bumping up against this, what I guess mainstream science, or what they consider mainstream, the more it's really challenging people to start pushing their own limits. And the more I've noticed that the skepticism is sounding less and less like skepticism and more like denial at this point.
Yeah, I mean, exactly. They're stuck in materialist ideas, old physics, Newtonian physics, rather than the new science of quantum physics, which is proven. So, come on, people.
Yeah, it's actually very reminiscent of all things, because you think these, sides are completely opposite of each other, but it's very, very reminiscent of the church back in the day, where, if you had, if you were hearing voices, or even like bilocating, or moments of levitation, usually the church would say, well, that was witchcraft, demons, etc., unless you were in the church. You might have been a nun at a monastery or whatever, and you were experiencing these things, but that's okay. You're of the church, so it's of God. But if it's out there, then it's of the devil, and we had to burn you at the stake. And it's kind of what we're seeing today in that scientific academic world. If you are a scientist and you're presenting this, you're okay. It's of science. But if you're not a scientist, then no, we're gonna not literally burn you at the stake, but burn you at the stake within like our media, like what some of these archaeologists are trying to do to Graham Hancock right now. It's really that same mindset.
Yeah, it's bullying.
Yeah.
I think that's why these conversations and your books are so important, because it starts the conversation in a new way, because there's just some fantastic ideas in this, and beginning to look at space and time and how we operate it within it, or how we operate within it differently, so that we can start relating to the world in a really, really different way. Because I think that's where we're going with as people, right? Like, we have to start evolving these ideas, or else we're going to be very confused very quickly.
But one of the wonderful things about like the internet these days, I mean, there's so much garbage that you can find out on the internet, but we're able to do things like sit down, have this conversation together, and present it to the world. So you're going to have viewers and listeners that tune into this, television shows that we've been on, books that we've written, these sorts of things that they will be able to pick up and be able to get that information and be able to proliferate it, rather than the suppression that's occurred for millennia beforehand.
Yeah, when because you spent time in Alaska.
3 years.
Years. And when you were there, what did you notice? Was there anything that, I mean, you talk about some of this in the book, but let the audience know, like, what were your experiences there? Because it was really interesting.
It was cold.
Yes.
It was cold. Froze my butt off during the winter. But you know what? The summers were generally beautiful. And I definitely recommend going to visit there during the warmer months. And people want to see the northern lights. It's like, well, you got to be able to brave the cold. It was an interesting time in my life. I was very young. I was stationed up there from when I was 18 to 21. I got married while I was there. I had a couple of children. So there was a focus that was on that. But yeah, I had some interesting experiences up there as well. Primarily in the Alaska Command Building on Ellendorf Air Force Base, where it's one of my shadow people experiences. Like the entire, so I was stationed up there for 3 years. The last 2 were there in the Alaska Command Building. I had to wait a year for my security clearance to come in. That entire 2 years, off and on, I would see this phenomena. But it wasn't just me, it was most everybody that worked down there. And it wasn't something that we could take up the chain of command or anything like that, because you didn't want to find yourself down at mental health and get your security clearance taken away. But it was, many of us, of the enlisted personnel that would kind of, talk to each other about it. It might go up as far as maybe a staff sergeant or maybe a tech sergeant or something like that. And like my supervisor was aware. And so one of the first incidents that I had there, and I'd already seen a little bit of something there. And when I first ended up in that shop, he was away. I can't remember if he was on vacation or a temporary assignment or something, but he came back like 2 weeks later. And we sat down in his office to have our first real conversation together, but he had the door open and we're just chatting, we're talking. And all of a sudden I noticed this shadowy figure just kind of glide by the door. And he noticed that I noticed this. And he just simply said, "Yeah, that happens here." And then we just kept going on with the conversation. But yeah, you would be walking with a buddy down, you could just, between the cubicles, and all of a sudden, phew, did you see that? Yeah, I saw that.
Oh, I love that. I love that. Well, and it's...
I don't know if I love that, though.
Oh, it was pretty harmless.
Yeah.
And just kind of looking back at it. So there was a prevailing story that, because people are trying to make sense of what they're seeing and what's going on.
Yeah.
So the prevailing story was that the building had originally been a hospital, and where we were at in the basement there had once been the morgue, and like where our racks were for the routers and multiplexers and all that, had been the room where they kept the coolers. So it was like, okay, that makes sense. Maybe these are the souls of, the people who were brought down to the morgue or something like that. Well, when I went to write the book, Alaska's Mysterious Triangle, of course, I tell the story in the book. But I, of course, want to present all the accurate information that I can about the building. So I want to look up, okay, what was this hospital? And came to find out that the building was never a hospital. It was built exactly what it's being used for today, which is command. So then it makes you wonder, well, okay, so if it wasn't a hospital, then what were all of these shadows that we were seeing down there? And so, so my theory is that we were experiencing some sort of time slip, that we were seeing, just because the energy of the Alaska Triangle, and maybe even something going on within the architecture of the building, that it was creating an environment where we were seeing images from, it could have been personnel from the past, personnel from the future, could have even been ourselves at different moments. So that's my theory as to what we were experiencing there.
It's reminiscent of a number of investigations that I've done as well, so sort of similar environments. And that just seems to be this sort of shadow person, kind of see something out of the corner of your eye. It also makes me wonder if it may have had something to do with some of the electromagnetics there, because I know that can sometimes shift and alter our perceptions as well, which is there's so many layers to this. You could just dig and dig and dig and dig.
Yeah, there are. And one of the fascinating things about that, Morgan, is that because we did see those shadows kind of moving in and about many of the different areas down there, like some just darting into the rack room. Some, there's even another room further beyond that had like some old printers in it, and see things dart into there. But the area where we saw it the most was actually in the back office area, away from all of the high tech stuff. So, unless there's something coming from on the other side of the wall, because there was an old vault that was back there. We never opened. It was kind of behind all the cubicles, and we had a bunch of old cubicle parts that were stored back there, so you couldn't really even get to it. But it made you wonder, okay, what was really back there? And I know further beyond that wall were the NSA guys, who I ended up working for when I ended up at Fort Meade in Maryland. And it's like, well, what might those guys be up to?
When Mike came down, it wasn't the last time, Mike, but it was the time before you came over to visit Edmonton.
Right.
That was the one thing that we noticed when we were within the sort of magnetic anomaly area of Alberta as well, was these sort of black drifting shadows that we kept seeing, which was really interesting. And I just like I wonder if like you're saying, are we seeing some kind of entity? Are we seeing, because like we've said before, the Indigenous talk about these all the time.
Yeah.
Or are we seeing something that is just a replay of the past on some level, or a time slip, like you're talking about? Like it seems to be something that's connected.
It could be like some sort of echo or something like that. And yeah, that doesn't necessarily mean it has to be an echo of the past. It could be an echo of the future too, since all time is concurrent. But yeah, it's kind of like that, where we're just getting just a glimpse of something because of the whatever unique electromagnetic properties of the area at the time. Everything again comes down to frequency, resonance, energy, vibration. So was it just happen to be the right frequency for a moment? I mean, we have some different options on the table here.
Yeah, oh boy, do we ever. so many options. Yeah. Well, I want to start to tie this up with talking about your current book that just came out, because it looks fantastic. I'm so looking forward to diving into it. It's all about portals, like what we've been talking about. So do you want to talk about that a little bit and tell people what the meat of this is? Because it's really cool.
Yeah. Portals to the Stars, Inside, Stargates, Atlantis, and Secrets of Ancient Egypt. So this is really like a culmination of a lot of my work here in recent years. I've been doing the Stargates of Ancient Egypt tour, but I've also, when I've done some of my work in the American Southwest and other locations around the country and the world, you're seeing these areas that were designated as portals. We talked earlier about the spiral symbol of the portal, and we find there, like in the American Southwest, Chaco Canyon, some of these other locations where you have the petroglyphs telling the story of the star people using the portals to come here. So I cover a lot of that. Of course, I cover a lot of the portals and stargates in Egypt, which are right there in plain sight. There's no hiding it at all. I mean, the doorways, the gateways, the rooms, they're actually labeled as stargates. There's the word on either side. Stargate or Great Stargate. You go to like the Temple at Edfu, which has the basically it's the Atlantis story. They called it the homeland of the primeval ones, but it's the Atlantis story that's there. That was that Solon went and got from Egypt in 600 A.D. and passed on to Plato, and Plato wrote the story. That's how we know of it today. But within the text there, now they didn't have actual stargates at Edfu, but within the text, they're talking about stargates, and like some location that had 100 stargates. Wow. Okay. So it's all right there in plain sight for us to see and experience. But yeah, I go into a lot of detail about when we were talking about the X points, what the difference between a portal, stargate is, what stargates may have been used for, even like in the lab today, where they are trying to create wormholes within the lab, and they're doing it on the quantum level, very small scale here. But they were able to do this a couple years ago. And so, yeah, it's a really fascinating study into all of these different areas.
Oh, gosh. I want people to be able to go pick up both of these books. They're so interesting. Amazon, is that where people need to head over to?
Yeah. Available on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Books A Million. So you can just go to my website and click on the link. So MikeRicksecker.com. And I have the new book right on the front page, latest release. But if you go to my book section, then you have, well, I'm up to 14 now. You have all 14 listed there.
Wow.
It's really, really great. And I really want to keep having these conversations, because I think it's beginning to allow people the freedom to look into this without that stigma that we were talking about before, and realize that it is grounded in history and science. And that's why I really, really appreciate your books, because it gives people context to hang on to. So they're going, okay, wait a minute, how do I fit this into what I know about the world? Well, it does fit into what we know about the world, and it does slip into these areas of our brain that maybe we don't utilize enough, but but it does fit into this framework, and I think it's going to give people a brand new way of thinking about this and presenting it and talking about it, and maybe even when they have these experiences, because we know so many people do, that they're going to be able to put some context to this.
Yeah, and that's what I try to do with the books. There's definitely a metaphysical aspect to all of it, and I present that. The second chapter in there, the first chapter, there's a lot of science in there, talked about the X points and portals naturally occurring, that sort of thing. But then I get into like portals in the wilderness. So not just the missing peoples, but also like Sasquatch sightings and things like this. There's an idea that Sasquatch are using portals now, so we dive into all of that, but also backing it up with some of the science as well. So it's like really trying to marry those two worlds. They don't have to be two separate things. They actually work together. If the two sides would just stop butting heads, they could come together here.
Yep.
If only one day.
Yeah.
One day. I think it's getting closer, though. I really think it's getting closer. But Mike, thank you so much for doing this today and chatting with us about this. I hope everybody goes out and picks up this book. It's so interesting. It'll give you guys a brand new view of your world, without a doubt. And I promise you won't be able to put it down. So thank you so much. And we hope you will do us the courtesy and the joy of coming back to talk more about portals, because that's where this is going. So
yeah, Morgan and Mike, it's always a pleasure to talk with you both. We've had some wonderful conversations. I'd definitely be happy to come back again.
Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you.
And we are back. As usual, fantastic convo with Mr. Ricksecker. Me too.
Every single time. It's these areas that seem to be just throughout the world always have something new to offer. And I think this one in specific fascinates me because it is so remote. There's a remoteness about Alaska that is so eerie and intimidating. And I mean, when we think about these expanses of places, especially in the deep, dark cold of winter, having all of this mysterious phenomenon piled on top of that it gives me goosebumps.
Yeah, I'm not exactly the most hardy person, I don't think. So I don't know how I would deal with. I mean, I grew up around a lot of snow and ice. I mean, you've got some there now in Edmonton, but I don't know how I would deal with disappearances and all that kind of thing along with the cold. Cold's bad enough.
Cold is bad enough. And I mean, and for those who don't know, I'm sitting here in Edmonton, Alberta right now, which is the northernmost populated city in Canada. Mm-hmm. And it gets quite cold here in the wintertime. You're looking at, sometimes up to minus 40 or more in Celsius. And we have those areas here that do have that very remote feeling to them when we get that cold. And I mean, just to couple that with these, like you were saying, Mike, these weird disappearances, it's so eerie. Like, where are these people going?
Probably somewhere warmer. It could be. I don't know. I really don't.
It could be. I mean, there's so much to unpack with this whole subject, because you get into not only the missing people, and then the incidences of these Sasquatch that are aggressive, like really aggressive up there. We talked to Ron Moorhead about this, the fact that everything seems bigger in Alaska. I mean, Texas likes to make that claim, but I mean, for real, Alaska kind of takes the cake when it comes to big creatures, and it's, I mean, it baffles me every time we have these kinds of conversations, because it's like, we just know so little about our environment, and it makes you think twice about, going out there and hiking.
Hiking? You mean like going for a walk in the park from one side of the park to the other sad, and there's a 7-Eleven at the end?
Well, and that actually kind of brings up an interesting point that I talked with Chad Lewis about. This was a couple of years ago, is that our idea of remote here is like whether or not we can get through the blizzard to the Tim Hortons to get a coffee.
Yeah.
I mean, unless you're further up north, and I mean, then of course there's vast amounts of prairie and stuff like that, and mountains. Sure. But we really don't have a concept of what that is unless you really live up there and have to endure it. And I think not only does it lend to that idea of mystery that we all really like to think about when we think about remote places, but a place like Alaska, when you hear these cases, you realize that that's not just some folklore tale. They've got the numbers to substantiate what's going on here. Like, this is documented fact and numbers, which is, that to me is really disturbing.
I'm sure it's not the last triangle we'll hear about. And we do have some other stuff planned for Christmas. So please stay tuned, because we've got all kinds of holiday stuff coming up.
Oh gosh, yeah, we do. And we've got some really, really cool guests. We're going to be talking about everything from intention and building relationships with some interesting critters, all the way to, and even more. I mean, we've got so much coming up. You guys are going to really, really enjoy our Christmas episode. We've got we're going to be talking about spirits and Yuletide and all those things. So I can't wait.
I absolutely love Christmas ghost stories. Love it.
Oh gosh, me too. And I can't wait for our next few episodes. So everybody, you better stay tuned and make sure you're subscribed and get ready to enjoy the lovely holidays with us.
So thank you for joining us on this eerie expedition, dear listeners.
And remember, there is no line between the natural and the supernatural. All is consciousness. Until next time, stay curious, friends.
Supernatural Circumstances is a co-production of Entity Seeker Paranormal Research and Teachings and Good Egg Studios. This podcast is part of the Curious Cast podcast network. Theme music by Corey Johnson of Catalyst Records in Edmonton, Alberta. You can learn more about Morgan Knudsen at entityseeker.ca and learn more about me, Mike Browne, and listen to my show, Dark Poutine, at darkpoutine.com. Feel free to email the show at supernaturalcircumstances@gmail.com.